There is a kind of silence that lives right before failure, the moment when you say, "I'll do it tomorrow." It sounds harmless. It feels small. But in that pause, entire futures are lost. There exists a discipline so ancient and so direct that it kills that pause forever. It doesn't rely on motivation, willpower, or emotion. It cuts straight through hesitation like a blade through fog. In the old monastic schools, before words like productivity existed, monks faced a far greater enemy: delay. Delay in action meant delay in enlightenment. Delay in discipline meant years wasted in the illusion of preparing. So they created a method not to move faster, but to remove the distance between intention and action. They trained to collapse that space until thinking and doing became the same thing. This is the system that ends procrastination, not by tricks or hacks, but by transforming who you are. Every time you postpone, your mind whispers, "Later will be easier." It lies. Later multiplies resistance. Later builds walls. Later becomes never. Procrastination is not laziness. It is internal conflict. A split between the part of you that knows what must be done and the part that fears losing comfort. The ancient monks knew this tension well. They called it the battle between the self that wants to awaken and the self that wants to sleep. To defeat procrastination, they didn't fight emotion. They trained identity. They didn't ask, "How do I feel about this?" They asked, "Who am I when I face this?" The practice that ended their hesitation was not motivational. It was merciless. They trained to act without debate, to move without delay, to execute without comfort. Over time, the hesitation that once ruled their minds vanished, not because it was conquered, but because it had no place left to exist. This is what you're about to learn. The ancient discipline that ends procrastination by turning action into instinct. Every act of procrastination begins in silence, a pause so small it feels harmless. You tell yourself you'll start in a few minutes, after one last distraction, after you feel more ready. But readiness never comes. The minutes dissolve into hours, the hours into guilt, and what began as delay quietly becomes defeat. The tragedy isn't that you failed to act. It's that you trained yourself not to. Each postponement teaches your mind that resistance wins. Every time you wait, hesitation grows stronger, like a vine wrapping around the will, slowly stealing its air. The monks understood this centuries ago. In their world, delay was death. Hesitation in meditation meant years lost in confusion. Hesitation in duty meant the community faltered. So they built a discipline that annihilated hesitation, not through motivation, but through identity. They didn't say, "I'll meditate later." They said, "I am one who meditates." The difference seems small, but it changes everything. Later belongs to the person you are avoiding becoming. Now belongs to the person you already are. Their method was to collapse that distance, to make doing the natural extension of being. They discovered something profound. Procrastination is not about time management. It's about self-management. You think you're waiting for the right conditions, more energy, fewer distractions, a better mood. But the truth is, you're avoiding the discomfort of starting before you feel ready. The monks trained this impulse out of themselves by ritualizing immediacy. When the bell rang, they moved. No thought, no evaluation, no internal meeting about whether it was convenient. The bell was the universe speaking. Now. Their discipline made hesitation impossible because action became instinct. To understand how they lived is to see how deeply they respected the present moment. A novice once asked an elder, "How do I stop delaying my practice?" The elder replied, "Stop calling it practice. Every time you name something as separate from who you are, you give yourself permission to postpone it." To the monks, there was no difference between meditating and breathing, between working and existing. That was the secret. Eliminate separation, and procrastination dies with it. In the modern world, people look for systems, planners, timers, apps, to fix delay. But the monks had only one system, awareness sharpened into obedience. When thought said wait, they moved anyway. When emotion said, I'm tired, they bowed anyway. When doubt whispered, it won't matter, they acted anyway. They didn't silence the mind. They simply stopped listening to it. They understood that obedience to purpose is freedom from hesitation. They called this discipline the step before thought. Imagine it like this. When your hand touches a hot surface, you don't debate whether to pull away. You just do. That same immediacy can be trained for purposeful action. The monks rehearsed it every day, not with fire, but with work. Every meal prepared, every floor swept, every breath counted was an act of immediacy. They weren't training to be productive. They were training to be pure conduits of will. Most people try to escape procrastination through emotional tricks. They wait for inspiration, guilt themselves with deadlines, or hype themselves up with motivational noise. But the monks saw emotion as unreliable. If you depend on feeling good to act, you will only act on good days. They built something stronger, duty. Duty doesn't ask for energy or mood. It simply exists, unchanging, like gravity. When the bell rang, their bodies moved not because they wanted to, but because the act itself was sacred. This is what the modern mind has forgotten, sacredness of action. You treat daily work as disposable, so you postpone it. But the monks treated sweeping a floor as if they were cleaning the mind itself. When meaning is sacred, delay becomes disrespect. Their discipline wasn't about speed, it was about presence. Every motion was the full expression of intention. And when you give full attention to what's in front of you, procrastination has nowhere to hide. Think of your own life. Every later you whisper is a quiet rejection of the present moment. You're telling life, not now. I'll meet you when I'm comfortable. But life doesn't wait. It moves with or without you. The monks understood this truth painfully well. They lived by impermanence. Every sunrise a reminder that time will not negotiate. To them, the discipline of immediacy wasn't strictness. It was mercy. It spared them the agony of wasted potential. When you start, before you feel ready, you reclaim the energy that procrastination steals. You stop feeding the illusion that you need to feel inspired to act. The monks called it entering through the narrow gate. The narrow gate is the uncomfortable moment when you resist beginning. It's tight, painful, suffocating, but beyond it lies freedom. Because once you start, the discomfort dissolves. You stop thinking about the task and start becoming the task. That is where the weight of tomorrow disappears. The future loses its hold because the present consumes everything. Every action completed now removes a burden that hasn't yet arrived. This is what modern psychology now confirms. Action precedes motivation. The act of doing generates the emotion of wanting to continue. The monks discovered it long before science gave it a name. The question is no longer, how do I stop procrastinating? The question is, who am I when the moment demands action? Are you the self that obeys comfort, or the self that obeys purpose? One path leads to endless negotiation, the other leads to liberation. The monks chose the second, and through repetition, they became the kind of people for whom delay simply stopped existing. Procrastination dies the day you stop worshipping the feeling of readiness. It dies when you honor movement more than mood. It dies when the gap between knowing and doing becomes too small for hesitation to live in. That is the discipline that ends procrastination. Not through control of time, but through the mastery of self. Every discipline begins in motion. Not in thought, not in planning, motion. The mind invents stories to delay the first step. But the body has no story to tell. The monks understood that when the body moves, the mind follows. So they trained the body to act before the mind could interfere. It was the opposite of modern self-help, which teaches you to think your way into doing. They trained to do their way into thinking. To them, every hesitation was a form of arrogance, the belief that your opinion about what must be done is more important than the truth of the moment itself. One of the oldest teachings described this through metaphor. A stone does not argue with gravity. A monk does not argue with duty. It sounds harsh, but hidden inside that harshness is freedom. Because what is procrastination, if not constant argument with reality? You know you should move, but you debate. You know you should write, but you wait. You know you should begin, but you justify. This endless conversation with yourself is the cage. The monks ended it by removing permission to speak at all. They had a practice called immediate obedience. When an order was given, to rise, to sweep, to chant, the body moved before thought arrived. Over time, the neural pathway became automatic. Thought still happened, of course, but it was irrelevant. The bell would sound, and movement followed. No reflection, no resistance. That is how the discipline was built, by making obedience faster than hesitation. You might think obedience sounds oppressive, but it's not submission to others. It's submission to clarity. Once you've decided what truly matters, the rest must obey that decision. The monks had already chosen enlightenment, discipline, service. Every moment after that was simple execution. In your life, you too have already chosen. You know what matters, your work, your growth, your commitments. Yet you hesitate because you keep reopening the decision every day. That is why procrastination thrives. You debate what has already been decided. The mind craves novelty, but the spirit craves depth. That's why distraction feels exciting but leaves you hollow. The monks starved their minds of novelty until repetition became nourishment. They performed the same rituals at the same hour for the same purpose, and through that monotony, they found transcendence. What began as discipline became devotion. The rhythm itself dissolved their resistance. Once rhythm takes over, time disappears, and procrastination becomes impossible. Modern thinkers often call this flow state, but the monks would laugh at that term. To them, flow wasn't a mental trick. It was a moral responsibility. When the body moves, they taught, it is the spirit walking. To stop without reason was to interrupt the divine. This belief may sound extreme, but it forged unshakable consistency. They didn't need motivation because they were never waiting for permission to begin. The greatest misconception about procrastination is that it's cured by inspiration. You think if you find the right quote, the right video, the right system, you'll finally act. But procrastination doesn't end through addition. It ends through subtraction. The monks subtracted options until there was nothing left but the act itself. One bell, one duty, one movement. The simplicity was brutal, and it worked. A monk once explained it to a visitor. We are not disciplined because we are strong. We are strong because we have removed everything that makes weakness possible. That line defines the heart of this system. Weakness isn't inherent, it's invited. Every open door, every spare moment, every negotiation creates an entrance for delay. Shut every door, and there is only forward. Think of how many ways you invite procrastination. Leaving your phone near you while you work, starting a task without a clear end, checking messages mid-focus. Each action reopens a door you just closed. The monks lived in environments designed to eliminate these doors. Sparse rooms, single tools, deliberate tasks. They weren't escaping the world. They were engineering their minds. And you can do the same without a temple or monastery. You only need boundaries sacred enough to resist your weaker self. Imagine this, a morning without choice. You rise when the alarm rings, not when it feels right. You move directly to your task, not to your thoughts. You eliminate the pause where hesitation lives. The day feels different, quieter, heavier, alive. That's the temple of action. It's not a building, it's a state where movement replaces contemplation. One monk described it perfectly. When you hesitate, you create two lives, one who could and one who didn't. Ending procrastination isn't about learning how to start. It's about killing the second life before it forms. Action unifies you. Hesitation divides you. That's why the monks bowed before work. Not because the task was holy, but because the moment was. The act of beginning is sacred, and once you treat it that way, you'll never delay again. The greatest illusion of procrastination is that you're in control. You tell yourself you're choosing to rest, choosing to wait, choosing to start later. But the truth is that hesitation is already choosing for you. The monks knew this long before neuroscience caught up. They observed that the mind always seeks equilibrium. When you're still, the mind becomes restless. When you act, the mind becomes still. Most people live upside down. They wait to feel calm before they move. The disciplined mind reverses it. It moves first, and calm follows naturally. When a novice monk first arrived, he would often ask, "Master, how do I clear my mind before I meditate?" The master would smile and say, "By meditating." The student would look confused, waiting for a deeper secret. But that was the lesson. Movement precedes clarity. The act of beginning is what purifies confusion. That's why procrastination always begins with overthinking. The mind is trying to solve a problem that only motion can solve. One teacher explained it with the image of muddy water. If you stir it, it stays clouded. If you leave it untouched, it clears on its own. But most people confuse stillness with idleness. True stillness is born of action completed, not action avoided. When the monks finished their daily work, they didn't collapse in exhaustion. They sat, fully present, because they had nothing left undone. Procrastination doesn't only delay results, it steals peace. The discipline that ends it is not punishment, it's restoration. Every unfinished task you carry is an invisible chain around the mind. Each time you act immediately, you break one link. That's why they began each day with the phrase, "Leave nothing pending within." It wasn't a productivity slogan, it was a spiritual command. Because what's pending outside of you always mirrors what's unresolved inside. A cluttered desk and a restless mind are the same disease. The monks trained the body to act as a mirror of the spirit. If a task appeared, they responded. If resistance appeared, they moved through it. Not to suppress feeling, but to honor purpose. The modern person fears discomfort as if it were damage, but discomfort is the heat that forges character. The monks didn't seek ease, they sought friction, because friction is proof that you're facing truth. Comfort, on the other hand, is proof that you've stopped moving toward it. A senior monk once told his students, "Pain is not the voice that says stop. It is the voice that says focus." The same applies to procrastination, that heaviness in your chest before starting. That's not your body asking for rest. That's your spirit calling for alignment. The cure isn't escape. It's obedience. When you begin the task, the pain loses its command. Movement translates discomfort into direction. Psychologists today describe a similar phenomenon, the activation threshold. The hardest part of any action isn't doing it. It's beginning. Once movement starts, resistance collapses. The monks discovered this centuries ago through their simplest rituals. Every act of cleaning, chanting, or bowing began with the same principle. Act before thought solidifies. The longer you think, the heavier the task becomes. So they trained to act immediately, catching the moment before hesitation took form. A novice once hesitated before lifting a heavy pot. His master struck the ground beside him and shouted, "You think while the world waits." The lesson wasn't cruelty, it was urgency. The world doesn't stop because you delay. Opportunities, time, energy, they keep moving. Every moment spent in hesitation is a moment lost to momentum. In their philosophy, discipline was not rigidity, it was harmony. To move when life asks you to move. To rest when life asks you to rest. Procrastination is disharmony, a refusal to dance with time. You wait when time says act. You rush when time says still. The monks learned to listen to time like a musician listens to rhythm. When the bell rang, that was their cue. Not an external command, but an internal reminder. The universe is moving. Join it. That's how they turned discipline into instinct. They didn't negotiate with tomorrow because tomorrow didn't exist. There was only the bell, the breath, the present movement. And from that simplicity came impossible consistency. What would your life look like if you lived that way? If you erased the space between knowing and doing? If every moment of resistance became your invitation to begin? That's not ancient mysticism. It's practical transcendence. The body doesn't lie. The hand that reaches for the task becomes the mind that no longer delays. Action purifies thought. Motion builds momentum. The mind that moves cannot procrastinate because movement is its natural state. In the end, the discipline that ends procrastination isn't about control. It's about release. You stop fighting yourself. You stop bargaining with time. You begin to see that hesitation was never your protector. It was your captor. Every time you wait for the perfect mood, the perfect day, the perfect burst of clarity, you're handing your life to chance. The monks understood this truth so deeply that they built their entire existence around immediacy. When the bell rang, they moved. No thought, no story, just action. To live this way in the modern world is rebellion. While others drown in endless planning, you will be the one who moves quietly through chaos, guided by rhythm, not impulse. You'll feel discomfort rise, and instead of escaping, you'll act. You'll stop waiting for confidence and start building it through motion. That's what separates the disciplined from the dreamers. The truth is, discipline isn't the death of freedom. It's its creation. Because once you train the body to move without debate, you reclaim your time, your energy, and your self-respect. You become the kind of person who acts before doubt can whisper. And that kind of person cannot be stopped. Not by fear, not by fatigue, not by tomorrow. So begin now, not later, not someday. This moment is the bell. Move.